You mentioned the word consciousness, and I think that has different meanings to different people. Some might say, oh, I'm unconscious, and they might mean, I'm asleep. There's also that other definition of consciousness, which is what it's like to be something, I think is one that's often used. I know I've heard Sam Harris talk about it, but really you're just talking in terms of consciousness, you're just talking about the experience of being aware. That's what you mean when you say consciousness.
The fact of being aware.
Right. The fact of being aware, which is undeniable to all of us. And because it has no objective qualities at all, it's no different in me than it is in you, than it is in any of the other 7 billion people, or indeed any of the animals or anything like that.
Yes, you are in London, is that right? Where are you sitting now?
Well, on the border with Surrey. We're on the way.
Okay, let's say you're in Surrey. So you're sitting in your room in Surrey, and I'm sitting in your study in Surrey. I'm sitting in my study in Oxford. We're sitting in two separate spaces. Yeah, and there are innumerable such spaces on the earth. Well, is that really true? Are there really innumerable spaces? Is the space, if you were to take a sample of the space in your room, and I were to take a sample of the space in my room, and we were also to take a sample of the space a mile up into the sky and compare them, they'd all be the same. There's only one physical space in the universe. Those spaces, that one space, seems to be enclosed by the four walls of innumerable rooms. And as a result, there seem to be numerous separate physical spaces. But there aren't. The four walls of my room don't really limit the space of this room. The space itself is unlimited or infinite. Well, I would suggest that awareness was the same. The content of each of our minds is different. These are the equivalent of the objects in each of our rooms. But the essence of each of our minds, namely pure consciousness or pure awareness, I would suggest is the same awareness. In other words, just as there is only one physical space in the universe, I would suggest in reality there is only one consciousness or one awareness, and it is the same consciousness that perceives through the limited faculties of each of our minds. So the content of each of our minds is different, but the essence of each of our minds, namely consciousness or awareness, is the same. And this is what enables the experience of love to take place. Love, I would suggest, is the recognition that at the deepest level we share our being. Isn't that what you feel when you love someone? You feel that the border or everything that separates you from them to a greater or lesser degree dissolves. And sometimes you say to someone, I feel one with you. It's like there's no me and you. Yeah. In other words, there you are tasting your shared being. That's what love is, the recognition or the taste of our shared being. So love would be one. Beauty is another example, but we don't necessarily have to go into that. Love is one of the ways that what I'm suggesting sounds possibly far-fetched to some people, or a little philosophical, or the suggestion that the awareness with which each of us is aware of our experience is the same awareness. But I would suggest that as an idea, it may sound unfamiliar to us, but as an experience, the experience of love or beauty, it is very common. Not only is it very common, it's the experience we love above all else. Is there anything you love more than love? No, everybody loves love above all else, love or happiness.
Yeah. Now, it might sound like a bit of an outlandish claim to suggest that we have a shared being, but actually, and I want to come back to this, is just a very quick detour for anyone who's perhaps a little bit lost or thinks this is so far out of the mainstream, but there actually have been some very eminent scientists who've pointed in a similar direction. So Max Planck is the obvious one, was the Nobel Prize winning physicist who claimed sometime in the mid 20th century that he saw consciousness, as we've defined it, as you've defined it, as being fundamental, as being primary, as in you can't get behind consciousness. And that out of consciousness comes things, come matter, everything like that. And not the other way around, which is the way we currently understand it, the kind of the existing paradigm. Now, before we get into that, Rupert, I'm going to leave that tantalizingly there. Okay. Before we get into that, I want to come back just briefly. To the separate self. Okay. And this, you described it as in being like taking off all our clothes and stripping back to our essential nature. So that unlimited, non-objective, aware being that we are at our core, which is what you say. And I'm interested then in identity, because people like to cling to identity. If I think in sport, let's take an example in sport. In football, now a lot of people really identify with their football team, and I always think of quite a funny example, which is that I remember listening to a football phone-in once, and Chelsea had just won the Premier League, and a fan rang in, and the guy on the other end started the call by saying, "Here's Bob, Chelsea fan. Congratulations, Bob, on winning the Premier League." and this gentleman actually said, "Thank you," in all seriousness.
Yes, he felt he had
well
won
done,
the league.
Bob. Well done.
Yes.
Well done, Bob. You've really done your bit. So there's people are really clinging to or like to have identities. You only have to look at Twitter bios. I have this political affiliation. I support this team. I'm a father. I'm blah blah blah. Whatever it may be. But actually, the implications of what you're saying that actually, not only do we not need any identity, at our core, we don't have one.
It's not that we don't have an identity. There is something in our experience that is referred to by the word I or self or myself or being. There is an experience that corresponds to these words. But what I would suggest is that essential self or being is not in any way limited. And that what is called or referred to sometimes as the separate self or the ego is an apparent limitation of our essentially unlimited being. Now, how does this apparent limitation take place? Through belief. And it is later substantiated by feeling. But it is essentially a belief. I, Bob, am identical to I, Bob, won the premiership. Bob has identified himself not only with his own thoughts, images, feelings, activities, relationships. He's substantiated his belief in himself as a separate identity by affiliating himself with a political movement, a football team, an ideology, and in this way he has substantiated the illusion of being a separate self. And we pay for this illusion with our happiness.